Hi class, this lecture is about empiricism. So we've talked about skepticism some, we've talked about rationalism, we've talked about Descartes giving an example of a rationalist. Another competing theory of knowledge is empiricism, and basically it's the mirror image of rationalism. They are opposites. So it starts with their definition of knowledge. Empiricism thinks certainty is too high a bar to set for knowledge. We can be certain of almost nothing. Our own existence, is that it? It seems like we can know a lot more than that, and we should be able to know a lot more than that. So they define knowledge as justified belief, right? So think of it like, I believe airplanes are more dangerous than automobiles. Is there any evidence to help me justify that? Is there data? Can I use my senses? It seems that when we look at number after number, crunch it, flying is actually safer than driving in terms of number of fatalities, accidents, and whatnot. Now, empiricists still hold to a kind of certainty, but it's not infallibility. It's mostly related to, I can see this water bottle, and you can see this water bottle, and anyone with eyes can see it. They might not even know the term water bottle, but they can see it. Well, we've bridged the gap between appearance and reality, and we now have knowledge of this through sense experience. It's a belief that can be justified to a high degree of certainty using sense experience, both my own and collectively. So they're defining knowledge in looser terms, opening up the door for more things to be considered knowledge. Again, it's important because as they define knowledge differently, it's going to have a huge impact on other things down the road. Some famous empiricists: Aristotle, John Locke, George Berkeley, David Hume, and others. Again, these four figures are completely disagree about a ton of stuff. But because they fit the anchor points of empiricism, they're all considered empiricists. So anchor point number one, this will sound familiar, just the opposite. Sense experience is the only legitimate foundation for knowledge. Now this is a little bit stronger. If you remember, the rationalist said reason is the primary means to knowledge, primary. But sense experience still plays a huge role. For empiricists, they make a stronger claim. Sense experience is the only, it's not primary now, it's the only legitimate foundation for knowledge. What they're saying here is that we are born with a blank slate. We are born knowing nothing, no a priori knowledge. We are born, as John Locke would say, as white tablets of paper. That's the mind. The only thing that writes on the mind, the only thing that begins to make a dent is sense experience. You are a baby, you are born, and you are flooded with sense experience. That begins to form the mind. Everything we know or could ever know, everything we learn comes from sense experience. Reason kicks in only after. So sense experience gives the mind content. Reason sorts through the content and makes sense of it, gives it meaning, perspective, and whatnot. But the mind is blank until sense experience writes on it. So that's anchor point number one. Number two, reason is unreliable unless grounded in sense experience. So if you can picture someone holding a balloon that wants to float away, reason is the balloon. The string tying reason to reality, to earth, is sense experience. You can reason all kinds of things, but what keeps your rational mind grounded to what actually exists and what is real is your experiences. You can imagine a detective coming onto the scene of a crime and saying, I don't want to see anything, don't show me evidence. I'm going to go into the closet and I'm just going to think about who did this, right? Well, you could come up with all kinds of fanciful interpretations and conclusions, but the bottom line is, sense experience is what's going to keep your mind grounded to the facts of the case. So reason is important. Reason is very important for the rationalist or for the empiricist. but only secondary, only after the mind has been filled with sense experience. And then finally, a priori knowledge does not exist. We are born blank slates, right? Nothing. And John Locke, a famous empiricist, makes a couple of arguments. One, he says, if there was a priori knowledge, we'd have universal consent. All humans would agree. Because it was a priori, everyone would have access to it. But John Locke says, is there anything in the world that you can think of that everyone agrees on? Is there any universal consent in knowledge? Well, I don't think so. It must not be a priori then. The reason we don't have universal consent with anything is because we have different experiences, different upbringings, different cultures, and so we end up disagreeing. The second reason John Locke says that we don't have a priori knowledge, one is no universal agreement. Two, any concept that you could come up with, that you could construct, saying, oh, it's a priori, John Locke argues, I can tell you how you have it from experience. You give me a concept, I'll tell you how it comes from experience. God. No one's ever experienced God with sense experience, yet every culture has a concept of God. It must be a priori, right? I mean, no sense experience of God, yet we have knowledge of God. And John Locke says, no. Think about early people trying to survive. Lightning flashes. They have no way to explain it. Rain falls from the sky. Earthquakes. Something very powerful must be doing this. Must be gods. Why do you think the earliest gods are like sun gods, rain gods, the god of the earth? And so God originates the concept from sense experience. Now John Locke's a Christian. He believes God exists. He just thinks our understanding of God comes through sense experience, right? So John Locke, here are the dates. 17th century British empiricist. He's written some famous works, an essay concerning human understanding, a treatise concerning the true original extent and end of civil government, and others. I'm just going to touch on a few of his ideas, right? He's our example of the empiricist, the person who says all knowledge comes by sense experience. Here's a picture of John Locke. Again, another $1 million idea. Adrian Brody. Huh? Look at the. I think we've got someone who could play John Locke. Put a wig on that guy. So again, John Locke critiqued a priori knowledge. I've just given you the two. No universal consent and a priori knowledge can be explained using simple and complex ideas. So John Locke argued all knowledge begins with simple ideas. There are two types. Simple ideas of sensation, things like color, sound, number, right? Hot, yellow, too. Just very clearly, right? And then you have simple ideas of reflection. I can think about the concept of yellow or red or hot or smooth or square. Very simple ideas, right? I can experience them with my senses. I can reflect on them later. These are the building blocks of all knowledge. So every a priori concept can be explained this way, and I'll get to some examples. So you have simple ideas that then get turned into complex ideas, right? So complex ideas now, we have simple ideas, then we get reason. Reason helps turn simple ideas into complex ideas. So if you want to know the role of reason for Locke, it's taking simple ideas and helping to turn them into complex ideas. We do this through compounding, relating, and abstracting, these three ways. Reason's helping us here. I'll give some examples of each. A basketball is a complex idea made up of multiple simple ideas. So compounding is like a compound word. You take park, you take bench, you stick them together, you get park bench. Compounding is similar. You take the simple idea of round, so the shape is a simple idea, the color orange is a simple idea, bouncy is a simple idea. You take the simple ideas of round, orange, bouncy, you put plus signs in between them, you add them all together, and you get basketball. Basketball is a complex idea made up of a bunch of simple ideas, right? And everything, right? My phone is a bunch of simple ideas. It has color, shape, texture, number. All of those things together equal my phone. And now when I see it, I immediately register it as a complex idea. But it can be broken down into simpler parts. You can even compound complex ideas. So think of any monster that's ever been invented by the imagination, right? Well, you usually take a human, compound it with something like a bat, smash them together, you get a vampire. A human, a wolf, you got a werewolf. A human and a sea creature, swamp thing, right? I mean, this is how we do it. The human imagination takes what we've experienced and compounds it, smashes it together, and can create all kinds of interesting things. But there's no knowledge you can have, nothing that you could dream of, nothing that you could possibly imagine that doesn't have a foundation in simple ideas of experience. Another thing is we relate ideas together. So you relate simple ideas. Think of like a color chart. Red, darkest red, bright red, yellow, orange. When we see them together, the mind immediately relates. This is brighter than that, smoother than this, colder than that. You can't stop the mind from doing this. We relate ideas, right? This is how it works. I mean, if you've ever kissed more than one person, you know the mind immediately compares. You know, better than this, not as good as that, right? There's a thing that happens, and it might be nice to turn it off, right? Like, I wish I didn't do that. But I can't help but relate ideas and experiences to one another, and the mind does this automatically. It helps us create complex ideas. And the final one is abstracting. Going from what we've experienced and then making conclusions that go beyond. I wonder what would happen if we did that and we abstract from experience. If we look at these three things, compounding, relating, abstracting, John Locke says, I can explain every bit of knowledge, all a priori concepts. So for example, we talked about the concept of perfection, right? I've never experienced perfection with sense experience, but we all have the concept of perfection within us. And the rationalist says, if you have knowledge of the concept, but you've never experienced it with your senses, it must be a priori. And John Locke says, no, that's not what happens. Imagine an apple. You come along an apple tree, you've had no experience of it. You pick up an apple, it's mushy off the ground, you take a bite, ugh, right? You just think apples are gross. That's one experience. Now imagine the next time you pass an apple tree, you pick one that's just recently fallen on the ground and it's much better. And you go, oh, this is not too bad. And then imagine if you picked an apple off the tree, it was ripe and fresh. Ooh, that's good. Maybe you get one out of the crisper from the refrigerator. And John Locke says you relate all of these experiences with apples together. Good, better, best. And then you think to yourself, you abstract, I can imagine an apple with no flaws, no blemishes, pure, perfectly sweet. That apple probably does not exist, but the concept of perfection, the concept of a perfect apple, a perfect being, a perfect bargain lounger, whatever, comes from various experiences of imperfection and then abstracting to a perfect apple with no flaws. So this is compounding, then relating, good, better, best, then abstracting to perfect. Think about the concept of infinity. I've never experienced infinity. I've only experienced the finite. And yet, I have the concept inside of me, it must be a priori. No. John Locke says you experience things that live for 3 days like butterflies, 10 years like dogs, 70 years like humans, hundreds of years like buildings, and then you, from this relating, short, long, longer, longest, I can imagine something living forever, being infinite, going on for eternity. It's the abstract move. Now, maybe nothing infinite exists, but the concept comes from these experiences. And so John Locke says, I can explain all of your supposed a priori concepts using experience, using simple and complex ideas. So why do we need them, right? You were born a blank slate. Everything you know or could possibly know comes from experience. Everything you've ever dreamed has its foundation in some experience. Everything you could possibly imagine has its foundation in some experience. And that's the argument. The real debate between rationalists and empiricists is anything a priori at all? Can we know anything before experience? This matters, and for your paper, it really matters, because what about morality, right? Is morality all learned, as John Locke would argue, from my parents teaching me, from my religious texts, from going to church, from whatever it might be? If so, can we hold people to common universal standards? Because everyone has different experiences and different cultures. Is there anything universal about ethics if it's all from experience, which is very subjective? If, however, morality might have some universal elements to it, then maybe we've got some a priori concepts. Maybe morality is written on our hearts, and we have access to a conscience, something that will let us say, you know what, that's wrong, and it's wrong for everyone. It's a real debate. It's very relevant. It gets right to the heart of relativism versus universal truths. It gets right to the heart of the moral debate. I want to hear your argument. Who's right? Is morality a priori, at least some things, some moral principles a priori, or is it all learned from experience? So good luck. If you have any questions at all, let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys online.